Hello. How's everyone doing? Awesome. So I'm Matt Daimler with StreetEasy, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our third annual first-time homebuyer seminar. Really excited today to bring you a great show. One of the things about us is, we interact with so many of you digitally throughout the year, emails and push notifications, but it's a real privilege for us today to be in front of you live and hear from you directly. So speaking of directly, we're going to use a little bit of technology. There's a lot of you here. We want to make sure your questions get answered as we go through today's show. We're actually going to use a little bit of technology for that, an app called Slido. So you saw today as we were going through, there's Wi-Fi here. So that's the New School Guest Wi-Fi network. And we're using an app called Slido. It's available on mobile web. It's also available in the App Store. You type in NYC Home. It's all one word, no spaces. Inside that app, you'll be presented with 3 different rooms with your ability to ask some questions there. During today's sessions, those rooms are what we're going to talk about. So the first one you'll see is a NYC Financing 101. That's where we're going to be able to talk about questions about mortgages and things like that. So in there, you'll see the ability to vote on questions. So tell us the ones that you want to ask and you want to make sure that we get answered. You also have the ability to put in new questions yourself. So as we get to these portions of the presentation that are interactive with you, the audience, please make sure you pull out your smartphone, get on the Wi-Fi, and dial up Slido to be able to ask us those questions. So we're really excited today to bring you a great show. We've got a really good presentation. The actual agenda is in your packet in front of you. So if you've got your packets, you'll see the lineup that we've got. We're going to start today off talking about data. And to do that, we're going to bring up our senior economist, Grant Long. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you all for coming out here this morning. As Matt said, I am StreetEasy's senior economist. I'm the head of the research team there. We dig through all the great data that we see on the real estate market here in New York City to bring you interesting insights and stuff that will hopefully help you better understand the home buying market in New York City. So today's presentation is going to be on understanding the buyer's market in NYC. First step in understanding the buyer's market is to be prepared. You guys, by coming out at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, have taken the good first step of making that effort. So we're going to walk through a couple different things that will help you better understand the market. We're going to start off by talking about where prices are and where they've been going. We're going to follow it up by talking a little bit about what drives demand for homes in New York City. We're going to talk about how the market works, sort of season to season. And then we're going to wrap up by talking a little bit about what to expect when you're looking on the market. So start off with some numbers. Sales prices in New York City. A couple different points here. You see a lot of variety. So expensive in Manhattan, a little bit cheaper in Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, Bronx. Should probably make sense. There's a lot of different stuff on the market right now. These numbers are really high. So if you compare these to the average price of a home in America is about $200,000. So you see a lot of prices here being a multiple of that. That just sort of underlines how tricky the home buying process here can be and the importance of being prepared going into it. These prices have gone up 27% over the last 5 years, which is a pretty healthy rate. It's about 4.8% per year that we've seen home price appreciation since then. It's driven by a really strong economy here in the city. But those price growth numbers haven't been equal, right? So here I want to show you home price growth. This is the rate at which homes are growing. So this is not saying that home prices are going down. Sorry, not as many deals as you might think if you thought this was home prices. It's home price rate growth. So this is the rate at which home prices in Manhattan are growing. And it's interesting because 2014, we saw really, really strong price growth, right? The New York City economy is coming out of the recession, growing really fast. A lot of developers took a look at this and said, hey, it was a great time to build. You see a lot of new shiny stuff coming up all around the city, particularly in Manhattan. That's reflected by the high home price growth in 2014. A lot of that supply is on the market now. A lot of it's really expensive. And we've seen home price growth slow to almost to a halt, right? So we're at 0% basically in Manhattan right now, where we have a lot of these really, really high-priced homes, really fancy stuff. I'm going to throw another line on here. Sorry, these are a lot of lines. This is some of the only lines I'm going to show you today. I'm a chart person. I'm a data freak, so bear with me here, but there's a good point here. In Brooklyn, we see a little bit more measured price growth, right? So it wasn't quite as high in 2014. Stayed pretty strong through 2015, 2016, and now we're at about 3% in Brooklyn, right? So we've come down. There is a lot of new building in Brooklyn. There's a lot of shiny new stuff that's sort of coming into that high end on the waterfront in Dumbo and Williamsburg. But right now for price growth, we're about 3% in Brooklyn. Now contrast this with Queens, right? So Queens is a lot more affordable in many ways than Manhattan and Brooklyn, and we're seeing home prices growing at a faster rate there, right? So Queens took a little bit of time to come out of the recession. The market took a little bit longer to recover there, but now we're seeing really, really strong demand in parts of the city where we see the most affordable housing stock, right? So for those of you who might be looking at the more affordable end of the market, whether that's below $1 million, below $500,000, there are a lot of homes out there, but we are seeing a lot of demand for them and a lot of competition. Right, so talk really quickly about where that demand is coming from. We're going to talk about millennials. There are tons of stereotypes on millennials. I do not want to play into them. I, at some point, was myself defined as a millennial. I don't know who made that decision, but it is what it is. They're an important group to talk about, though, because they're going through a lot of life changes, right? So this is a group of people generally 23 to 37, maybe getting married, maybe starting a family, starting to accumulate a lot of income, going through some professional growth. We surveyed millennials at StreetEasy. We put out a huge report on their attitudes and, or all New Yorkers' attitudes and perceptions of housing in the city. We found that 1 in 3 plan to buy in the next 12 months. That's what they told us, right? So some of this may be aspirational, but with so many people looking to buy in the city, it's not surprising that you see such strong price growth and such high demand for affordable homes. And these folks who are planning to buy aren't planning to move to the burbs. So of those millennials who said they're going to buy, 9 in 10 plan to stay in the city. They're not even considering options elsewhere, whether that's California or Westchester or Jersey or moving abroad, right? And part of this comes along with a really quickly growing economy here in New York City that is worth mentioning, because we hear a lot about Amazon and HQ2 and what's going to happen and how that could change housing markets wherever that Amazon does choose as their second headquarters. But there's a lot of different companies that are calling New York City, increasingly calling New York City home, right? So that's Google, that's Facebook, who are building out teams here with really high-paying jobs and really diversifying the economy here. So as this trend continues to happen, we continue to see strong demand for homes. It sort of echoes a lot of what's happening in other coastal markets, whether it be Boston or Seattle or San Francisco. So that's what's going on right now. Renting for a lot of people moving to the city here remains an attractive option, right? So I wanted to touch on this really quickly. We at StreetEasy crunch a ton of numbers around renting versus buying. It's probably a choice many first-time home buyers are going through. Those numbers are featured at streeteasy.com/tippingpoint. We look at the different costs and benefits of owning versus renting, and we find that we sort of highlight that owning has a lot of upfront costs, right, which is important to remember, and that renting remains a really attractive option for a lot of people. So if you account for those high upfront costs, the important thing to consider when you're thinking about buying for the first time is how long you plan to stay in the home. We see, on average in New York City, that in order for buying to really make financial sense, in a lot of places in the city, it can be up to 5 to 7 years that you need to consider staying in a home for really buying to make sense over renting. This is particularly true as we see a little bit of a slowdown in the rental market right now. Right? One thing I also wanted to talk about that complicates the buying process, there's a lot of different factors you need to take into account. Tax reform. A lot of people are talking about this. GOP-led tax reform was passed into law in December. Not going to get into the big factors on that, the net factors, but on a personal level, it can depend on a lot of different things of how it affects each individual, right? So that can be personal income, marital status, property taxes, all depend on how this will affect you net and what you need to consider when buying, right? So it's really important to do your research. If you earn a ton of money, you're single, you have really high property taxes, it's probably net negative. If those things aren't true for you, it may not be as much of an impact. It may be positive for you. So all of those things are a huge factor. Another thing that we're watching really closely is how everyone else reacts, right? So can tax reform reduce demand for housing in New York City? We don't really see that happening. because of the reasons I just went through. A lot of people continue to want to live in New York City. There's a lot to gain from being here, as you well know, as you're considering buying. And we don't see that changing as much. We see strong demand going forward. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the homes on the market, right? Every month on StreetEasy, we see on average about 15,000 different homes listed just on StreetEasy, right? But that varies a lot by time of year. So we see a lot of new homes coming onto the market in April or May, right? When people are looking to move over the summer, the weather starts to get a little bit better, it's a good time to go to an open house. Sellers understand this, and that's when a lot of people will decide to put their home onto the market. So it's an important thing to consider as you're looking through, that's when you're going to see the most new homes coming onto the market. So if you're looking July, August, when people tend to go on vacation a little bit more, maybe half the city's out in the Hamptons or something, you'll see a little bit fewer homes on the market. You'll see stuff recover a little bit for a second season, September, October, and then slow down again in the winter months when no one really wants to be out trudging around looking at houses in the ice and the snow. Does not mean you should not be buying at any particular point in time in the year. Just means that if you're on the market in January or February, you can expect more houses to be coming on the market in the next few months. The stuff that's on there likely has been on there for a little bit of time. So speaking of time on StreetEasy, average home spends about anywhere from 10 to 11 weeks on StreetEasy. But that varies a lot, again, by the time of year that we see homes on the market. So January homes spend up to 25 days longer than average on the market versus the bottom of the season in April, or versus the peak of the season in April or May, when there's a lot of demand out there and a lot of people shopping for homes. Speaking of competitiveness metrics, the number of people that are looking for homes, we look at days on market as one of the metrics that we track for competitiveness in a given market. So if there's homes that are selling really quickly, that's a really competitive market that favors sellers versus buyers. Or areas where homes spend more time on the market tend to favor buyers. These are also markets that tend to have more price cuts and have a bigger discount from the original asking price to their final selling price. Right? We call these the top markets for buyers, and when we crunch all these numbers together, we find that a lot of these top markets are actually in really pricey neighborhoods, and they tend to be in Manhattan, right? And some of the priciest areas of Queens and Brooklyn, right? And these are areas where, if you're a buyer, you can expect to have more negotiating power. Doesn't mean that you should only buy in these neighborhoods. Doesn't mean that these are the best deals in the market. Just means that these are areas where these are markets where buyers tend to have more negotiating power. Now contrast this with the seller's markets. These are markets where we tend to see a lot of competition, right? Homes spend less time on market. They tend to have fewer price cuts and sell at less of a discount from their original asking price, right? And these are markets that tend to be in Brooklyn and Queens. Some pricey stuff in there. I will point out Cobble Hill, median sales price of over $1 million, still pricey. But the more affordable areas of the city tend to be more competitive. Again, does not mean you shouldn't be looking in these neighborhoods. Just means that a lot of people are, and you can expect to see a lot of competition. And it really sort of you need to make an extra effort to be prepared when you're going into these markets. Now, competitiveness varies with price. All right, I'll say in a minute why this is important. We find that for each $100 price per square foot increases, units tend to spend an extra week on the market, right? So if you're looking at a really aggressively priced, affordably priced home, you can expect that home to go off the market relatively quickly. Again, for a lot of the reasons I mentioned, we see really strong demand in that area, that sort of segment of the market. We see a little bit less new supply coming onto the market. New supply tends to be at the highest end. But there are a lot of homes on the market in that price range. Homes in the bottom half of the market are also less likely to have their price cut, right, for the same sort of reasons. So they're 30% less likely if they're in the bottom half of the market. Bottom half of the market, we're talking less than roughly $900,000 for what's on StreetEasy. I know that's a really high number. There are plenty of affordably priced homes on the market. We had over 9,000 homes on StreetEasy last year that were priced below $500,000. But again, these tend to be really competitive homes. A lot of people out there, really important to be prepared when you're looking at these things. That's unfortunately all I have time for today. Ran through a ton of numbers. Everything that I talked about today is actually, will be coming out on our website. These slides will be up there too over the next couple of weeks, along with some in-depth research that goes through all the themes that I just talked about. You can tweet at me too. My handle was on the screen earlier. Hopefully it's in your pamphlets. I'm at grantmlong.com if you have or grantmlong on Twitter if you have questions. Feel free to reach out to me. Check out our blog. We've got lots of great tools here and lots of great research coming out all the time. Again, part of being prepared in the market is really doing a lot of research and finding out different aspects of the market. A big part of that is mortgages. I am not a mortgage expert by any means, but luckily for you guys, our next presenter is. So we're going to welcome up to the stage. But thank you again for your time and attention.
Good morning. My name is Tony Zhao. I am a mortgage banker with Investors Bank in New York City. And today I'm going to talk to you about the entire mortgage process. Exciting, right? Just kidding. So before you start thinking of purchasing a home, I think one of the most crucial and most important things you should do is get yourself pre-approved. Now, a pre-approval is going to tell you what you're able to afford and how much you can spend. And a pre-approval should be a free process. Any bank, any lender can go and get you a pre-approval without charge anywhere. Starting 90 to 120 days prior to the process of getting a pre-approval is key. Now, what banks look for when they do a pre-approval, the first thing they do is they actually run your credit. So everybody knows somewhat of what their credit status is, right? You have myfico.com, American Express and other credit cards these days will give you your credit report and tell you the contents of your credit. Consumer credit and what banks use is commercial credit are rated very, very differently. So when a bank looks at your credit, they want to know that you have established credit, that you can pay your little credit cards or debts on time. Because imagine, we're going to give you a large sum of money. We want to know that you're able to keep up with the mortgage payments and that you're going to be responsible fiscally, because we certainly don't want you to be late or default on your mortgage. And there's two types of buyers, obviously, when you file your income. First, you have a W-2 employee, which is a lot of regular buyers, right? You have a regular job, you get a regular pay stub, and when a lender looks at your income, they're going to look at your pay stub, right? And they're going to go off of how much you gross. Here's an important number. The figure that banks will use to approve you and see how much you can qualify for is usually 45%. They take 45% of your gross, not your net, and that's how they calculate how much of a mortgage you can take out. Now, what's within that 45% range is the mortgage payment, how much the taxes are on the property you're about to buy. If it's a condo, they're going to figure in how much the common charges are and how much your homeowner's insurance is. And everything that's also on your credit report. So let's say if you have a $25 credit card, you have a car note for $200, that's going to be all inclusive of the $4,500 or 45%. And if you're self-employed, right, banks will require 2 years of self-employed tax returns. So if you're a 1099, you have a Schedule C. If you are an owner of a corporation, you have business returns. Now, I had a client once told me that, hey, Tony, I'm not going to have any issues qualifying for a mortgage because my business makes $1 million a year. I said, great. And when I got the tax returns, he was partially right. The guy did bring in about $1 million a year, but he wrote off $850,000 of it. So what banks are going to look at is they're going to look at line 37 of your tax return. That is called your adjusted gross income. That's all your profit after your deductions. And that's how we're going to qualify your loans. Because think about it. If you're self-employed, you usually file your return at the end of the year or the year after. So how is a bank supposed to come up with a figure on the health of your business? If you're self-employed and you're purchasing right now, something you should be able to start gathering is something called a profit and loss statement for 2017. Every bank, if you're self-employed, are going to ask for that. The profit and loss statement is going to tell us how your business did last year, and it will help us determine how much of a mortgage you're able to obtain. Assets. So there's something that came out in 2001. It's called the Patriot Act. And the US government actually enacted banks to kind of be monitoring funds for real estate transaction. So every bank, when they do a mortgage, are going to look at your bank statements for the last 60 days. And when they audit your bank statements, if they see any large deposits coming in, they want to know where that funds came from. It is very, very important. Sometimes by the time I get a mortgage application, I have cash deposits, I have money coming in from overseas, and you know what? Banks are not going to be able to use that. So they're going to look at 60 days of bank statements prior, and they want to know where every dollar that comes in, and they want to be able to source it. Gifts for a purchase is absolutely allowed, right? We're going to want to see where the funds are coming from. We're going to want something called a gift letter. Here's a very, very important thing. When you're getting money for a home, it has to be a blood relative. You can't get a gift from a friend. You can't get a gift from a neighbor. The money for a down payment used for a purchase transaction, if it's a gift, must come from family. That is very, very important. I'm going to talk about pre-approvals for a building. Did you know that 20% or more of buildings in Manhattan or in New York City are not lendable by banks? When I talk to a client, I usually tell them 60% of getting a mortgage is about the building that you're about to buy in. Isn't that crazy? You can have great credit, great income, lots of money in the bank, and if the bank does not like the building you're about to buy in, they're not going to lend to you. So why is that? I'll give you an example. So if a sponsor that owns a building, right, and they own more than 20% in a building, let's say all of a sudden they go belly up. What happens to that building? Financially, they can be ruined because that builder or sponsor is going to stop paying everything, including taxes, maintenance, everything related to the building. And think about this. A co-op or a condo is a human being. It's like a corporation. Every condo and co-op has tax returns. Yeah, they have to file tax returns. They have a financial statement, and they also have a yearly budget showing how much cash they have on reserve. So you certainly don't want to buy into a building that's not fiscally sound because you have monthly dues, and if the building's not fiscally sound, that's going to affect you later on because you can have something called an assessment that's going to hurt you as well. So I think a lot of this is self-explanatory, but believe it or not, I see a lot of these during the purchase process. Obviously, you have to pay your bills on time, right? Banks will do a credit check in the beginning of the process. That's going to tell us that you're a worthy borrower and that we know that you're probably going to pay us back on time. But banks will do a credit check. They do a soft pull credit check right before closing. So I've had clients who actually forgot to make some credit card payment bills, and that brings their credit score down from, let's say, a 720 to a 660. That's going to affect your rate, and if it goes down low enough, you can actually get declined for a mortgage. How does a bank know that you're a worthy borrower? When we do a process in the beginning, when we vet you, we're going to ask you to send us rent statements, right? We want to know that you pay your rent on time because that's a great indication of us that you're going to be paying us the mortgage monthly on time as well. So paying your rent on time is crucial because that's an indication for the lender that you're going to be paying the mortgages on time. Keep working. There is a rule. It's actually a federal congressional act. It's called ATR, the Ability to Repay Act. And the Ability to Repay Act says when you take out a mortgage, you have to be able to show the lender you have the ability to make that mortgage payment. Because guess what? Banks are lending you money from depositors like yourself. So we want to make sure that we're making good risks lending money because we're lending your money. That's very important. We have to keep that safety net. So right before closing, we will usually do something called a verification of employment. And I'll tell you something crazy. I've had clients who does not tell us that they quit their job, who they switched jobs. You know, always keep your lender, your loan officer, afloat of what is going on with your employment situation so that at the last minute, we do not call and say, hey, you know, John Smith has switched jobs 2 days prior to closing. Pay stubs. Lenders want to look at your pay stubs because on your pay stub, it gives us the description of your liabilities. Did you take out a loan on your 401k? Did you do anything on your pay stub that's going to hurt us or hurt the mortgage process? And you know, I think one of the most important things is keep asking the loan officer you're going to work with questions. Every bank in New York City that does New York City business has an approved building list. So when you put in an offer, right, aside from your pre-approval, you're going to want to make sure that the bank you're working with is able to lend in that building. Every bank in New York has an approved or declined list because every bank has vetted that specific building, and that's going to give us a good indication whether you're going to be able to get a mortgage in that building. So the don'ts. Don't buy large purchases prior to closing. As I said, right before closing, we will do a very soft credit check. And I'll tell you, I had a client once who was cleared for closing, had all his ducks in a row, was ready to close on a Friday. And then on Monday, we pulled his credit, and guess what? The guy bought an RV for $200,000. Well, that's obviously going to make a huge impact on how much your lending ability is. So what you don't want is to make large transactions. You don't want to close out credit cards because believe it or not, if you close out a credit card, that's going to bring your score down. You don't want to make purchases that's going to affect your credit because remember, that 45% threshold for debt-to-income ratio that banks look at, that's not something that we're able to negotiate and move around. That is a strict, hard 45%. And if your credit card or if you take out some type of debt that's going to bring that 45% up, it is something that is going to affect your closing. And in New York City, if you have a commitment that you've given to the sellers, and all of a sudden you're not able to close on that mortgage, you may lose your down payment. And nowhere in the country do you have to put down 10% for a down payment. So these are all very important things to make sure that you're able to keep your down payment and to close on your mortgage in time. Large cash infusions. I think that's my biggest nightmare. When I look at bank statements and I see a ton of deposits. So I had a client who we looked at his bank statements right before closing because the process goes and it takes a while. And we saw there was a deposit of $25,000. And we asked him, where'd you get that $25,000 cash infusion from? Well, he said, I wanted to cushion myself for closing costs. So I sold my Marvel comic book set at a convention. Well, I said, dude, that's going to be a big problem. If you can't source where the money comes from, we're not going to be able to use it. As a matter of fact, that could be a cause for declination. So we can issue a commitment, and banks will give you a commitment, but they have every right to take that commitment back. So these are all things that you need to understand, prepare for prior to closing, okay? The Patriot Act is a very, very tough act that makes banks, we want to know where every dollar that you're putting into your bank account where the money is coming from for closing. So be very mindful. If you're going to do a transaction financially into a checking account, savings account, money that you're going to be using for the closing, talk to your loan officer. Closing cost. And I think this is very, very unique because nowhere in the country are closing costs as high as in New York City. There is a mansion tax of 1%. Anytime you buy a home over $1 million, whether it's a condo, a co-op, multifamily home, there's a 1% mansion tax of the sales price, okay? And I had a client literally signed a contract for $1 million, and I said, can you bring it down $1 so you can avoid the mansion tax? That's how big of a disparity there is. Co-op. Co-op closing costs are usually very low because what you're doing is you're buying into shares of a corporation, and you're not paying for title insurance, you're not paying for municipal searches, you're not paying for title insurance. You usually pay the tax on the sell side, which is called a flip tax. And banks usually have a small fee up front. You have to pay for your appraisal. And in New York City, you have to hire your own attorney when you're doing a purchase. And when you are buying into a condo, condos, I would say, try to figure the closing cost for anywhere between 3 to 6% of the sales price, right? In a condo, you have to pay something called mortgage insurance. Mortgage insurance is anywhere from 1.8 to 1.9% of the loan amount. If you're buying into a new development, usually you have to pay the seller's transfer tax, and that is 1.9% of the sales price. So if you're buying into a condo, obviously it's a lot more expensive, and banks are going to want you to have some reserves after closing. And thank you very much.
Thanks. All right. Thanks. So we've got, again, Slido is where you're going to ask these questions. I've seen a lot of them already starting to come in. Make sure you go to the right rooms. This is Financing 101. Tony's presentation is where you're going to want to ask these questions. So I'll sit here and we'll get through some of these questions for you. So one of the first ones actually is something that got me. The first time we bought a home was about, I guess, 15 years ago or so in Seattle. And I was on the phone with the bank, and they said, do you want to lock in this rate? And I said, well, what does that mean? And they told me what it meant, and I said, oh, great, let's do it. And then 2 weeks later, the prices of mortgages had gone down, and I called back, and I said, hey, I want to lock in this rate now. And that's not how the locking works, is it?
No. So you're certainly able to lock in a rate at any given time. And I think, personally, it's up to the loan officer to tell you when you should be able to lock. And New York City is so specific because co-ops probably can take 90 to 120 days before you actually close on a process. Banks usually offer something called a 90-day lock or a 60-day lock. So that's going to be very typical at most banks that you go to. But you technically do not have to lock when you start the process. You can do something called floating the rate. Right? You cannot lock, just kind of see where things are going. And at that time, you can consult the loan officer, and they'll tell you when you can actually lock the rate. And one thing, most people think that rates are based on the Fed fund rate. You hear on the news, Fed raises their rates, and you're thinking mortgages rates are going to go higher. Well, mortgage rates are actually tied to something called the 10-year Treasury bond. So if you go to Google Finance or Yahoo Finance and you look and track where the 10-year Treasury bond is, that's going to be the indication of rates, where rates are going to go, up or down. So my advice is you try to float, but the usual lock rate is 60 or 90. And once you lock in the rate, you can't really unlock it because the banks can't come to say, hey, rates are up. Can we unlock you and give you a higher rate? Right. So that's not really how it works.
And so the question about co-ops is, when do you think is the right time to lock in? Should we wait for the interview, get a good interview, get approval? That's when you start to lock and work on closing? Or, sort of what's your best advice for a co-op in the interview?
In an environment where rates are not too crazy like it is now, I think once you hear back from the management company that they're ready to interview you, that's the perfect time to lock in your rate. So that gives you 40 to 50 days before you can close on a mortgage, and I think that's probably the best time to lock in a rate.
Got it. How realistic is it to buy a place with less than 20% down these days in New York?
I think the market is softening. Typically you have to put down 20%. Anytime you put down less than 20% in New York City, you have to pay something called mortgage insurance. And a mortgage insurance, which is PMI, is a third-party carrier. So they're insuring you as an individual, and you're paying a premium for the bank to say, hey, look, we have so little equity in the house that if we go late or if we foreclose on the property, the mortgage insurance company is going to come in and pay the loss on the foreclosure. So there are some banks in New York City that are starting to light up, I guess, on the down payment. But in my opinion, anything in a jumbo market, anything over $729,000, it's going to be very difficult for you to put down less than 20%.
Got it. One of the questions is, I heard first-time owners can put down lower down payments and get grants, but is it helpful or worth it?
So think about grants as a whole. Grants are something that the city, the government organization, they're offering these for lower to moderate income tracts, areas. So think about New York City. Most of New York City is wealthier, higher income, upper level income. So I don't think you're going to see as many grants in New York City. Maybe in the outer boroughs, places that have a low to moderate census tract is where you're going to be able to put grants or see grants. And think about it. If you're a listing agent, you're in a co-op, you're in a condo, and you have a buyer that is putting down less than 20% or coming to you with a grant, most likely your opportunity of getting that property is not so high.
Got it. So the next question is, if I change jobs during the home search process, and so I guess this is maybe you've already gotten pre-approval and you sort of, you think you have the right amount of money, but you're going to change jobs. Is that harmful to the mortgage process?
So it depends. Certainly you can change jobs, right? You can change jobs, but if you're going from a pay stub wage earner to a self-employed, that's going to affect you because banks are going to want to see 2 years of self-employed history to make a determination on how much you can borrow. Now, if you're going from a W-2 employee to another W-2 employee, then it should not affect the process at all, as long as you update the loan officer and tell them, hey, look, I switched from company A to company B, and as long as it's within the same line of work. Remember, most people switch jobs because it's higher paying. So that's usually very helpful on how much you qualify for. Unless you go from $80,000, now you're going backwards and take a $40,000 job, yes, that's going to improve your process, but typically switching jobs should not affect the approval process, as long as you let the lender know ahead of time.
Okay, can I get pre-approval from more than one bank?
Yes. As a matter of fact, a lot of people do that. The reason why you don't want to do that is every bank that pulls your credit might have a small effect on your credit score. So you go to 10 banks and you get 10 pre-approvals. Well, that means 10 credit pulls. So you're allotted a certain amount of credit pulls each month, right? That's your right as a U.S. citizen, as a homeowner, as anybody. And the credit system wants you to use them to pull credit. But if you have it pulled 5 to 10 times within a certain amount of time, that's going to bring down your score dramatically.
Okay, next question is, I live with a family member and I pay my rent in cash. How will that affect me when I'm getting pre-approval or getting approval?
I think that really depends on the lender. There are some banks who will be very strict. They want to see rent history. And if you don't have rent history, they will not give you a pre-approval. There's another way, which is sometimes a bank will do a verification of rent, meaning we'll send that family member a form, and that form will say how much the rent is, how long you've been paying it, so on and so forth. Also, if you can try to document it, banks will say, if you can show me bank statements for 12 months that you're withdrawing $1,000 a month from that specific account and your rent's $1,000, we possibly can match it up, and that will satisfy that condition.
Let's see, how do student loans affect buying a home?
Well, student loan, we look at as it's a regular debt, right? Because student loan actually may help you purchase a home because for some students, you may not have established credit. But a student loan, you've probably been paying for a while, and that actually helps your credit score. So in my opinion, I think student loans should not affect the process. It may actually help the process as long as you've been paying your student loans on time.
Okay, next question is, we've got a lot of our money in the stock market, and we plan to use it towards a down payment. When should we think about converting it into cash?
When we start the process on the mortgage approval end, we will use stock market funds, we'll use account statements from equities, because if you're buying a co-op, which is a majority of New York City, what people don't want to do is they want to sell their equity or sell their stock position so early in the game. And what if they do not get approved for that board? What if they do not get approved from the co-op? Now you've sold your stock position, you've incurred a capital gain on it, and now that money is just sitting there. So typically, a bank will use bank statements or account statements from a brokerage account, and we will allow you to sell it usually 15 days prior to closing. We want to be able to see that you have the liquidity and the proceeds from the stock market funds for the down payment.
Next question is, I'm on maternity leave. Congrats, Mom. Will a bank give me a mortgage?
Absolutely. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at how much you're earning. I think there's new regulation where we're going to want to know how much you're going to be earning after the fact. We want to know how much your maternity leave or your maternity pay is. But the answer to that is yes. We definitely will.
Great. If I'm getting a mortgage through one of the major banks, Chase, Citi, Wells, how much of the interest rate is negotiable? Do the bigger banks negotiate better, worse? What do you find?
In my opinion, I don't think banks will negotiate rate at all, right? Because banks are very regulated. So if they give you a lower rate than the next person coming a higher rate, then you're being unfair. And in my opinion, no matter what bank you're going to for a mortgage, the rate is the rate. It's based on your credit score. It's based on how much money you're putting down. They're not going to give a better rate for one person versus another because it's something that is frowned upon by regulators.
Next question is, do you recommend a pre-qualification if you're not 100% sure when or where you're going to buy?
Well, there's a big difference between a pre-qualification and a pre-approval. And most real estate agents that I know won't really accept a pre-qualification. Pre-qualification is just a very simple credit check, just a brief scenario of how much you make. So it's not very specific. As a matter of fact, I don't remember issuing a pre-qualification or seeing a pre-qualification in the last year.
Okay.
And the pre-approval actually lasts 90 to 120 days, and they can usually issue a new one without repulling credit. So it's really just something for your foundation for you to know how much you can spend and how much you can afford.
So we have someone asking about the challenges of buying in a sponsor building. I think you alluded to it earlier of sort of, if it's the sponsor owns more than 20%, it might be a building that's not loanable. Is that what you're looking for in the sponsors? Are there any other kind of gotchas to buying in a sponsor building?
Yeah, so every co-op and condo has something called a co-op and condo questionnaire, right? When a bank starts the process, they're going to contact the management company for these buildings, and they're going to get this condo questionnaire answered. And the condo questionnaire is sort of the report card for the building. And if one of the first things we look at is if the sponsor owns a certain amount of the building, most banks will not lend to it, and the magic number is usually anywhere from 20 to 25%. If the sponsor owns 20 or 25% of the building or more, if it's an established building, banks will not touch it, no matter how great your credentials are. So you'll see on StreetEasy sometimes a listing that says cash only. That's because they know that banks won't lend in it because the sponsor owns a certain amount, and the sponsor needs to sell some of the units before they can actually, put it to the market or have regular banks lend to it. But if it's a co-op, sometimes it could be good because their sponsor units, if a sponsor is selling you a unit from a co-op, Usually you don't have that board interview, and that closing time is pretty quick, within 30 days.
Is there a website where we can compare the mortgage rates from a lot of lenders?
You know, everybody is very different. It's like a fingerprint, right? So for a bank to say, hey, we're definitely going to commit to you and give you a 4%, 4 1/8, 4 1/4, it's not going to be accurate. So unless a lender pulls your credit, looks at the building, looks at your financials, and know how much money you're putting down, they're not really going to be able to give you an accurate quote. And most of what you see online is what I call teaser rates. It's for somebody with perfect credit buying in a non-condo co-op building, putting down 40%. So they want you to call them and say, hey, look, call me because we have the best rate. So that's not going to be accurate.
Great, we've got time for one more question, and so I think this is a kind of interesting one. At what age does it not make sense to purchase in New York City anymore?
You know, there are very strict rules and regulations that banks have to follow. You could be 90 years old and come to us and get a 30-year fix, and we must issue it because it's age discrimination, right? So we've done loans for 70, 75-year-old folks, and the reason why they take out a 30-year fix because it's amortized over 30 years and it has the lowest payment. Doesn't mean that they're going to be around for 30 years to pay it, but we know that it gives them the lowest payment. And regardless of age, if you have the income, if you have the credit and you have the funds, and you buy in the right building, we will lend to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Tony is so knowledgeable.
Thank you.
His contact information is in the sheet. He'll be here to answer questions afterwards. You'll be able to come up and ask him things. We're going to move on to the next portion. We're going to bring up Susan Daimler, and she's going to bring up a panel for us. Later for this panel, there's going to be a question period too. Make sure you flip rooms in Slido. So you actually want to choose a new room. You want to choose the buyer's agent panel. That's the one that we're going to be doing next here. Or is it the agents? Agents, yeah, next. Agents, sorry. Agents is going to be next. That's the panel. That's the room you're going to want to go into to ask your Slido questions. Thank you.
Good morning. Should be on, yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Daimler. I'm the general manager of StreetEasy, and as everyone here has already said, thank you for joining us on a Saturday morning. And it goes a long way in saying how, I think, excited you are, how inquisitive you are about the home buying search, which is exactly what we want you to be. And hopefully you're getting some great information and more to come. So next up is our agent panel. So I'm going to welcome up Carolyn, Krista, and Teresa. Come on down, as we say. So let's just start with some quick intros. Just 1 to 2 minutes, who you are, where you work, any specialties. Take it away.
Sure. Hi, my name is Krista. I work at Elegant Real Estate, and I'm really excited that you guys are here. I consider New York City my own home. I'm actually in the process of selling my second gut-renovated apartment to purchase a home that my husband and I can see ourselves raising kids in for the next 10 years. So I love New York. I love helping people find a place in the city to kind of call their own, to claim, put your stake on it. I find that extremely exciting. I'm blessed to be at a firm where I have full access to all the resources I need to help my clients fulfill their dreams. And I love the relationships, the friendships that I've made through the way in my career. It's been really great. It's been really exciting. So take this time to ask us any questions you have. We'd really love to answer them. Thanks.
Yes, hi. I'm Carolyn Campbell-Gould. I'm with Douglas Elliman, and I've been a realtor for quite some time. My coverage area is Upper Manhattan, the Bronx, and Lower Westchester. It's always great to start considering purchasing, and we're experienced agents who would be able to assist you.
Good morning. I work with Platinum Properties. We're a boutique firm located at 30 Wall Street. We work all over Manhattan and certainly in Brooklyn as well. I'd say what I really love about working at Platinum and the reason that we're here today is that we really enjoy developing the relationship with our clients, whether it's your first rental or your first purchase, or it's the second time you've sold with us and you're ready to move on to the next adventure. We really like to develop that relationship, and our agents, again, it's I think really part of being that boutique firm culture. All of our agents are family, and when if there's a particular area that you're looking in, we have an agent who can serve that area for you, and we all are kind of invested in that process with you, and that's what makes it a lot of fun and particularly rewarding.
Great. So let's start with the basics. So buy side, and there's a sell side. So lots of first-time home buyers have heard, maybe I don't need a buy-side agent. What value do they really bring? The other side is, oh, they're free, so of course I should use one. Teresa, we'll start with you about explaining the difference between buy-side agent, sell-side agent, and when you're buying a home, what are the advantages of actually having a buy-side agent?
Sure. I mean, just on a very basic level, the seller is, in New York, 99.9% of the time, the seller is represented by a seller's agent. And I think it's just common sense that if the seller is going to be represented by a professional who lives and breathes real estate every day, you as a first-time home buyer will want to be represented by someone who lives and breathes real estate every day. In terms of what you were saying with the cost, the seller pays the broker commission, and that is split between the seller's agent and the buyer's agent. So that is not a cost that you can incur, that you will incur it's not part of the closing costs that Tony was talking about before. And there is, sort of the idea, I think sometimes people think that they're gonna save money if they don't use a buyer's agent. First of all, plenty of times it's in the contract that the commission is the same, regardless of whether or not there is a buyer's agent. And at the end of the day, one way or another, you pay. And it's very confusing for both sides of the party when both sides of the transaction when the buyer doesn't really kind of know what's going on, and how the whole thing works. One thing that we've talked about is being in the industry, one of the advantages that you have working with a buyer's broker is we work with each other all the time, right? So we get to know who the seller's agents are. We kind of know their reputation. We know how they function. We know what it means when they say this or that. Just below ask is where the other offers are, can mean very different things depending on who you're talking to. So really having that kind of, you don't want to be unrepresented when the other side is, basically.
Right. Anything to add? That good?
Well, with a listing, a listing agent represents the seller. And, it's really important that you hire an agent or a broker to represent you. They will, it takes on a whole different face once you have representation on your side. It's often thought of that once you interface with an agent, that person is going to, they're working on your behalf. They're not. They're actually working for the seller. So it's very important and imperative that you start to develop a relationship with your agent and know that who are they representing. That's very important. If it is that you want them to represent you, then you hire them to represent you.
Great. And that's something too, thank you for bringing that up, is the selling agent has a fiduciary responsibility to the seller, and they've usually signed documentation that says that. And so we always liken it to, it's hard to go to court and be represented by the defense and the prosecution. So it is important to have someone who's looking out for your needs. So something we also often hear is there's lots of casual looking. right? So, and we love that at StreetEasy, you know, real estate here, bit of blood sport, bit of porn, people like looking around all the time. And so there's a lot of looking before you really are looking, but then all of a sudden you're at an open house and it's the apartment that you want, right? And suddenly you've turned from casual looker to a buyer, and you don't have an agent or a team because you've just been looking casually. So with that, what's the best time to get, you know, Tony talked about the best time to get pre-approved. What's the best time to have an agent? And we'll start with you.
Sure. I think the best times to start with an agent is really at the beginning. I mean, I think a lot of times you've rented in New York and maybe you've experienced good agents you've worked with in the rental process or friends who have bought, because the agent really helps you ask the right questions. How long will you be staying in New York? Where do you see yourself? What type of apartment do you like? They get involved and they're vested in kind of your life here. And so they help you sound out the type of apartment that would be fitting for you. And so then you can start looking on your own, and maybe you don't want an agent with you at every single open house, but you've established that relationship. And then the apartment that you see that you like, I always tell my clients, you can go to the open houses on your own. If you find something you really love, I'll go see it the next day for you, right? Like I won't make an offer before I see an apartment for a client. And so I think there's freedom of how you want to run your search. It's important to set expectations with your agents up front in terms of how you want to run the search. And most agents are very open to kind of working with your style and the way you'd like to work with them.
Okay.
Just to piggyback on what Krista was saying, I mean, your real estate agent shouldn't just be there for you for the transaction, right? They should be your real estate advisor. So even if if your question is, I'm thinking about buying and I don't know if it makes sense for me or not, we're happy to talk to you about that. You don't have to feel like you're wasting someone's time. People will say that a lot. I'm not really ready yet. I'm not ready to make a decision, so I don't want to waste your time. You're not wasting our time. That's our job, and that's what we want to be here for you to do.
And something that came across when we were talking earlier is this idea of patience and relationship building. And if you find yourself talking to an agent who is pushing you or being impatient and saying you need to buy, or we've been chatting for a year and a half, what's going on? Probably not a great relationship for you, and you need to go out and find yourself another buyer's agent. You should always feel comfortable and relaxed with the person who is working with you and representing you. So with that, what's the best way for people here to find the right side, the right buy-side agent for themselves? And I'll just also put on, an anecdote also we hear often, which I'm curious for some of you to address, is I got referred this great agent that my friend loved, but my friend bought in Brooklyn and I want to buy on the Upper West Side. So here's this great agent, but they're not quite in the area that I'm actually looking for a home. What do I do? So, Carolyn, we'll start with you.
Okay. As far as working with agents who, pretty much know the area, a lot of times you will ask, it's natural to know of a family member or a friend who has recently purchased in a particular area, but that's not the area that you're going to look in. There's the websites that you can go on to different real estate companies. You can Google agents these days, look up, their stats, where their concentration areas are, and you could, pretty much start with that. And,
I'd also like to add that Susan and her team at StreetEasy has really made it easy for you guys. So in the neighborhoods that you're looking, in the apartments that you see that you like, there's a buyer's agent there that they've already curated for you. Agents that work in those neighborhoods, that understand those neighborhoods. Go ahead, interview them. We have Platinum represented here at Elegran's here. Douglas Elliman is here. Take a look at the website. Read through some of the bios. I mean, we're real people. See who you resonate with. Give them a call. Have a conversation, and kind of see how it goes from there.
I also think it's important, it depends on the scenario. If you know that you want to live within a 4-block radius of the Upper West Side, of this, this particular area on the Upper West Side, then yes, maybe what you need is a neighborhood expert. But something actually, when we were speaking earlier, Krista had brought up, obviously many first-time home buyers don't know exactly where they want to live yet. right? So you want to make sure that you have someone, if you're looking in Staten Island or in Queens, I may not be the person for you, right? Because I don't know it that well. But Manhattan, Brooklyn, I know how to work with first-time home buyers, right? And so what you want is somebody who is going to know enough to help you figure out what is the right neighborhood for you. And then at the end of the day, you know, what you were saying before, Susan, I think the most important thing is how the particular agent or broker reacts to you. You know, and if it feels like they kind of are doing you a favor, probably not the right person to be working with, right? And it doesn't really matter what your agent knows until you know how much your agent cares, is something that I like to say first. Obviously, you want to have both of those covered. But if that person who helped your family member buy in Brooklyn is also pretty familiar with the Upper West Side, I don't think that that's something to keep you from using them. It's just because, you know, you certainly see some buildings where the same person has bought and sold in that building. If you're waiting for a particular unit to come up in that building, then you might want to talk to that person. But otherwise, I think as long as you've got somebody who understands New York City real estate and is willing to, you know, be there for you and be responsive and have a great attitude, that's the number one requirement.
Great. Something we also, a question we get from home buyers often is this idea of, can I have more than one agent, right? Can I have multiple buyer's agents looking for me on my behalf? And is that something that sounds okay, not okay? I know in lots of other places in the country, buyer's agents usually have people sign paperwork that says, I solely represent you. Less common here in New York City. So what's your advice there? You know, can you have multiple folks out there looking for you?
I mean, you can. You know, that's certainly up to you. But I think in terms of the, you know, just on a very natural level, first of all, it doesn't make sense. You want somebody who's going to get to know you, who's going to see the properties with you, get to know what you like, what you hate, and really be there for you. If you are running around with 2, 3 buyers brokers, then just also on a very, if I'm just radically transparent, if I have one client who is really counting on me, right, and believing in me and trusting in me to help them find their home, that's going to be my priority over the client who is running around with 2 or 3 other buyers brokers, because I'm not even really, you know, are they serious about buying? I don't know. Do they want to work with me? Maybe they don't want to work with me that much. So, you know, you just don't have, I think that's enough, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add, it's kind of like dating, right? First date, second date, but like how many dates till you want to get serious with someone? And really, a relationship is just like buying a home. You're very committed to buying a home. And so you want someone that's really committed to you. But I'd say, if you want to see another agent, it's okay, but have a conversation with your agent and say, hey, I just don't feel like you're supporting me enough, right? Or like, hey, like I don't really appreciate the pushiness. But the thing is that like area agents are people too, right? So have a conversation with them. It's totally okay. And maybe, you know what, there's someone in their office they can introduce you to, and maybe you'd actually get an apology for like, hey, I'm sorry, I haven't spent enough time with you lately.
Great. Oh, did you want to add?
Yeah, so, you know, it's agents like loyalty. You know, you have to trust us. We know what we're doing. I have been successful in actually getting my contracts, my forms signed. As a buyer's agent, I actually don't I prefer to work with buyers who are my clients because, you know, I'm representing them and I really take that very seriously. If I'm going to be loyal to you and really go to bat for you, you know, all we ask is for you to be loyal to us as well and not have 5 other agents that you're working with. So it's, you know, loyalty is important to us.
Perfect. So Tony talked about having a lender, right? You're up here talking about having an agent. Who else do you need on your home buying team? When should you assemble this team? And what are kind of the relationships between the agent and some of these team members? Because the agent is not allowed to say, this person. So who's on the team, when should they assemble the team, and how to go about finding those team members? Carolyn, you look.
Well, your loan officer is key. You have to, that's a great resource for you. So as soon as you start thinking of purchasing, you really should start that relationship with your loan officer, see where you are with your pre-approval. They're key. An agent that you're comfortable with, that's important. Consider having a buyer's agent who's going to really work with you. At some point, an attorney is going to be very important as well. And there are a lot of moving parts, and it's really a team effort to get you through, the process. You have their agents, the mortgage brokers, the attorneys, the bank's attorney, the appraisers, the management company, and eventually to get you to that interview, with the co-op board.
Yeah, I would echo Carolyn. The attorney is also key, and an attorney that matches your personality. Some of them are really cut and dry. They go through the due diligence very quick. Some of them are very good in nurturing and kind of explaining to you the process. So the attorney you should interview well as well and find one that kind of fits your style.
Real estate attorney too.
Right, yes, and real estate attorney that has done transactions in Manhattan. A lot of times people are like, oh, my parents want in Westchester, we'd like to use their attorney. And I'd say, great, but your due diligence process is gonna take a long time, and they might not understand New York real estate transactions, so I would encourage you to find a local attorney that has done both co-ops and condos before.
Yeah, I would just reiterate this because I think it's a really, really important point. New York City is a market unlike any other in the rest of the country or in the rest of the state. You want your real estate agent to be based in New York City. You want you don't want your cousin who lives on Long Island to be handling this for you. Long Island is great. It's very different from New York City. Same thing with a real estate attorney. Just because they've done transactions nearby in Westchester, Long Island, wherever, or if they live in New York City but they're not real estate attorneys, or they're real estate attorneys but they don't usually handle this kind of residential deal. You want somebody who lives and breathes NYC residential real estate every day. Same with your bankers, and it's just really important that everyone is really responsive and is operating also at a New York City pace. So they need to they need to be nurturing, but not Westchester nurturing, right? Absolutely. They need to be NYC nurturing, and really your real estate agent should be the quarterback through this whole process that is reaching out to the attorney saying, hey, is this done yet? Do you have everything you need? You don't have everything you need? I'm going to talk to the managing agent for you. Okay, hey, managing agent, my attorney doesn't have what they need. My banker needs this. And you really want to make sure that you have somebody also that you feel confident who can handle that, right? Who's going to be able to really quarterback the team.
Great. So lender, buyer's agent, attorney, right? And all with New York City specific experience and knowledge. That's the perfect. So in terms of co-ops, those have now come up as they always do in our talks of New York City real estate. First-time home buyers, sometimes squeamish, right? And so in your experience, and I think there's this sometimes an aura around co-ops that centers around 80th and Park Avenue, which is a very different co-op than you might find in other parts of New York City. Co-op's something that first-time buyers should embrace, steer clear of, buyer dependent. What's your take there? And Teresa, we'll start with you.
Sure. There's nothing wrong with co-ops, right? Just like there's nothing wrong with human beings. They're all just different, right? Some you like, some you don't, some are nice, some are mean. One of the things that is more difficult with co-ops can be whether or not you can rent it out, right? So if that's something that is going to be a big issue for you, if you're looking at this as a potential investment property down the line, then they're probably not for you. Otherwise, a co-op can be a really great option, especially if you're looking for something that's affordable. They're usually roughly about 20% less expensive than a condominium. It is a more extensive approval process in the beginning, but again, if you've got a good agent who's going to help kind of guide you through that and help you understand the process, it doesn't have to be as torturous as people make it sound. There are some different requirements. I do think it's going to be very much buyer specific as to whether or not it makes sense for you. In some neighborhoods, that's almost all you have to choose from. So to rule them out completely just because you've heard that they're difficult, I think is a big mistake.
Well, co-ops are really great. It's usually affordable, and if it is that you're on a budget and in a particular price range, you should definitely, look at that option in purchasing a co-op. It's, don't listen to all the, horror stories that you've heard out there. Your situation just may be different. You may be buying, in a particular neighborhood or building that's, maybe much easier for you, where that other person was purchasing that particular building or neighborhood, it probably was difficult for them. So I would say, it's a great opportunity to look into co-ops and, don't listen to all the negative that's out there.
80% of New York is actually co-ops, and a lot of people like living downtown, the West Village, Upper West Side. A lot of these neighborhoods only have co-ops, and we keep harping on this agent thing, but we know every single co-op building, right? Like, we know the tough ones. We know the tough boards. We know the processes that you have to go through. We know the ones to steer you clear of. We know the ones that are okay to apply for. And so I'd say that if you think you're going to stay here for a good, most of them you can rent out after 2 years, right? But if you think you're going to stay in New York for 3 years, it's worth considering. You can save some money in the process. And if you want to rent it out for a few years, you can, and you can sell it after.
Great. Are you seeing a lot of bidding wars these days? Is that the temperature of the market? And I think that's, people always want to know what's going on out there.
I think it depends on how you define a lot, right? In 2014, 2015, when you saw that great chart that Grant had up there about how quickly prices were going up, we were recovering from the recession, people were suddenly ready to buy, right? And it was really, really a seller's market, and it was, it was a fun time to be a seller's agent, I'll tell you that, because you'd have, and a difficult time. It was really important to be a good seller's agent because it's really easy to mess it up when you've got a whole bunch of offers coming in. So I would say we're not in 2015. It doesn't have that same hysteria that it really felt like then. People have calmed down, buyers have calmed down. They're like, wait, okay, nobody's going to do that to me. But it's still a very tight market in the, I'd say, certainly below the $2 million mark, around the $1 million mark, and below. It is a tight market, as again, Grant was showing us in those slides earlier. So you do still see multiple bids. I wouldn't characterize it as bidding wars. I don't think it's something to be afraid of. I think it's something to be guided through, to be realistic about how much is this property worth, how much is it worth to me, and having a really clear idea about that and being able to make an educated and rational decision about how much you want to offer on a property.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Right. What is the most common mistake you see first-time home buyers make? Krista, we'll start with you.
I think one of the most common mistakes is actually being too numbers oriented. I work with a lot of finance clients because I have a financial background, and a lot of them get very stuck on the value, right? I don't want to pay 10 over, I don't want to pay 20 over, I want to pay 5 over, and it's your hard-earned money, but at the same time, there's an emotional element to real estate. You're owning a home, and this is something that you're going to be in for the next 5 years. So that kind of money over a longer period of time, what has happened to a couple of my clients is we've lost out on a couple of apartments it's because multiple people are bidding on them, or it was slightly underpriced, and the listing agent was trying to get multiple bids on it. And so I'd say, like, find the apartment that you love, weigh through those things, weigh through the numbers with your agent as well. And I always run the comps. I send people Excel spreadsheets of the comps of, like, this is where I think, like, the high point is, the medium point is, the midpoint is. But, stuck between those few $1,000s, and it's not a few. I get that it's not a few. I'm in the process of buying myself right now. It is substantial money, but remembering that it's a home at the end of the day. It's not just like buying a stock in the stock market.
I'm going to go back to representation. I can't let it go. I think one of the, in my experience, one of the greatest misconception is that we actually, we work for you. We have to, establish that from the beginning, who we represent, and if it is that you want us to work with you. So I would say for me, that's the biggest misconception, is that as soon as you start speaking with an agent, that agent is on your side. When in actuality, we're not, unless we establish, if you're going to hire us to work on your behalf.
I would just reiterate how important it is to have the right professionals in place across the board. Because again, if my mother says I should use this attorney, I'd trust my mother more than the stranger real estate agent I just met, right? But at the end of the day, it really, just using people who are in New York, if it does happen to be somebody that your real estate agent has worked with before, that can be very good too, because we know how responsive, what their track record is, how responsive they will be. So being able to have that efficient, finely oiled machine in place and working for you, I think is really valuable.
Teamwork. Yeah.
Great. So we're going to move to some of the Q&A here. Not too late to go to Slido and put your question in. Let me change the clicker here so you can see exactly how to do that. But make sure you put it in the agent's room, and we will get to those. But we're still seeing some questions here about this buyer, picking your buyer's agent. So maybe we can get a bit more concrete about what am I looking for, what questions to ask. So yes, I can go online, I can read reviews, I can get referrals, but I'm meeting Teresa, I'm sitting down with you, I'm meeting you for coffee, it's our first date, right? What are the things I should be looking for to get at this relationship that I need?
I think one question you could ask is, how is this process going to work? If I'm working with you, how is this going to go? What should I be prepared for? Certainly, if you are looking in that 4-block radius on the Upper West Side, have you worked? How long have you worked on the Upper West Side? Do you know this area well? If you're, it depends on how much because to say, have you worked in co-ops, have you worked in condos, that obviously certainly is important. How much support do you have? Where is that coming from? Whether you're at a large firm or a small firm, doesn't matter. Are you doing this on your own? But at the same time, if you're on this huge team, right? Am I going to be working with you, or am I going to be working with someone on your team? How is that? Neither answer is bad, but you want to know, kind of probe, and just find out more about that. And I think one of the things if there's a specific question about this, I'm happy to answer it. But to me, really, it's as much the what as the how, right? If they're just trying to, find out when you're ready to buy, or and being pushy and trying to get you to the next step, then that's a really bad sign. If they, just started in real estate a couple months ago, maybe that's not a good idea. But, unless their mentor is the top-ranking person and they're going to be, he's going to be holding their hand the entire way through the process, and then maybe you're actually getting one of the top agents in New York,
I'd also say that let them lead the conversation. Sorry, I keep going back to dating, but I, as a woman, when I'm dating a man, I want him to lead me, right? Like I want him to be interested in asking me questions. The same thing with an agent. If I'm working with an agent, see what questions they're asking you. Are they getting to try to know you as a person? Do they care about you? Are they good at their job, right? Like, can they negotiate? Are they sharp? Like, what was their background in? What do they like to do? Do they talk about their colleagues? What transactions have they done? I would say that, even on a phone call, see how they lead you, see the questions that they ask you, and I think you'd know very quickly whether or not you'd want to start working with them or not.
Great. And something that Teresa mentioned I think is worth reiterating is this team idea. There are a lot of teams here in New York City, and often you'll meet with the head of the team who you're greatly impressed with and excited about, who either is going to list your apartment, it works on both sides, list your apartment or help you buy an apartment, and then all of a sudden, every open house, their assistant is meeting you, which, as Teresa said, is not a bad thing as long as your expectations are set beforehand. But the team structure is something to definitely ask questions about. Who is going to be my main point of contact, right? So are you on our first date here on someone's behalf, or are you here on your behalf? So we're going to go with this.
Send a proxy for your date.
Could be a matchmaker.
Yes, exactly. So one question.
Sorry to interrupt. I feel like people maybe are wanting more specific questions for that, and I just had a couple of ideas, just certain things of, you can ask the agent too, if you want specific things to be armed with, what is the market like right now? From what I'm looking for, what does the market look like? How do you handle a negotiation? Am I likely to come across multiple bids? What are we going to do if that happens? And just see how they answer the question. Those kinds of, just to give them a little bit more, something with a little more teeth.
Great. Okay. Is it we're going to move on a little bit from the representation part. Is it financially more interesting to buy an apartment that needs renovations or buy an apartment that's already renovated? And I think to get through these questions, I'm going to have one of you take each one so we can make sure we get to everyone's. So
You're renovating.
I love buying apartments that need to be renovated. I find that you get so much value out of them. It might seem like an intense and cumbersome process, but most apartment buildings that you would purchase in Manhattan, there's been contractors that have renovated in those apartments before, and so people that you can work with. And I feel that you get more than enough value back, and you also get the appreciation. A lot of people say, I want to invest in real estate, I want to make sure that I'm going to make money. I think buying something that needs to be renovated, you can actually get a good return from it. It's like buying a depressed stock.
And you get to put your own personal touch too.
Right, yeah. Exactly.
And we'll talk to the home buyers after. We've got some renovators in there as well, so we can chat about that. It's also something good to ask other people who have done it. Some people love it, I love it. Some people have done it and say, I'll never do it again. So it's also good to know yourself in that process. Another great question here. How can a middle-income buyer position him or herself to compete with cash buyers in a competitive New York City landscape? Anyone want to jump in? You want me to call on you?
I'm happy to. I just thought you were going to pick one.
Oh. Teresa, go ahead.
Sure. I mean, there are things you can do, and some of it is how comfortable you are with making these choices. You can speak to your mortgage broker about possibly going in with a non-contingent offer. It's very risky, very personal decision. But one of the things that they can do when they pre-approve you is to, really do a thorough search as to whether or not do all their due diligence to make sure that they'll be able to pre-approve you. But then you are on the hook for buying that apartment, even if you don't get the financing. I should have explained what that was first. But yeah, you're basically saying, I will buy this apartment even if I don't, or I will forfeit my 10% deposit if I don't, if I'm not able to close. But at the end of the day, I mean, cash is king, but if you are qualified and you have your 20%, you're gonna have to make a higher offer than the cash buyer. I mean, I think at the end of the day, one of the things that your mortgage banker can tell you is how much more is that gonna cost you each month? And even though it is a significant amount higher, a lot of times it doesn't really make a huge impact on your monthly payment. So chances are you'll have to pay more. but it doesn't mean that you aren't competitive in a bidding war.
You know, I think it's very important to have that dialogue with your loan officer and possibly your accountant for where you are, because where you think you need to be may not be, you may not be ready, and there's nothing wrong with not being ready at that particular time, and just tap into your, you know, your loan officer, maybe even your accountant to prepare you. I think preparedness is very important. You know, not to rush into buying something because you need to purchase right now. You may just need to wait a little while longer, and it's you know, you have that dialogue with your loan officer, your agent. You know, any good agent will tell you, listen, you know, I really think, and not push you. I really think that maybe, you know, speak to your accountant, your loan officer, and because you may not be ready right now. And there's nothing wrong with not being ready right now. You know, just wait until, you know, you have everything lined up and, you know.
Yeah. Perfect. And just to put a fine point on that, remember you can, what they're saying is you can represent yourself as an all-cash buyer. The seller doesn't care if you're all cash or if it's gonna, either way, they're gonna sell their home, whether it's to an all cash or to a bank, but it's the contingency they care about, because the contingency is what can slow down the process. So you can purport yourself to be all cash even though you're getting a mortgage on the back end. So that's, you know, and again, something, it can be risky, but something to talk to your agent about. So, Krista, any costs or fees associated with making that first offer on a home?
There is absolutely no cost to making that first offer, and really, I want you to be committed when you make that first offer, but at the same time, it's just an offer. We're in the process of negotiating the price. After that offer goes in, you still have 5 to 8 business days to really make a decision, because your attorney is going to go through the due diligence and everything. So a lot of times, people are really skittish about making offers, and I say, we don't know where the price is going to shake out. Like, let's put a bid out there to see whether or not, to test where the price level is. And then let's take the next 5 days to really start digesting and thinking and doing the due diligence around this property.
Great. Appraisal value of a co-op is less than what they're asking. Red flag, what are your thoughts?
Oh, no, not necessarily. I mean, you know, if it's some wildly different number, then maybe it would be a big concern. But it happens all the time that appraisals don't come in, or that they can be very. It's just very erratic, and I think at that point you have to, you know, you can one of the things that we do as a broker is if the appraisal comes in low, we will then send our own comps to the appraiser to try and get a reevaluation. You don't always get it, but we will certainly fight for you. These appraisers are working all kinds of different neighborhoods. You'll have somebody from Philadelphia coming in to do a New York City appraisal. So you don't have to panic and think, oh my goodness, my offer is way too high. I want to back out of this because this apartment isn't worth it. That's really not necessarily the case. Hopefully if you're working with a qualified professional, that is not what's happened. And then there are certain things that I don't know how far you want me to go into this, but in terms of the mortgage and everything, at that point, usually, if you have not waived any of your contingencies, if the appraisal comes in lower, you don't have to proceed, right? So that's the time to really have a heart-to-heart with your agent and to make sure that you still feel comfortable moving forward.
Great. Carolyn, this is a good one for you. We found an apartment during an open house. We've already made an offer. Can we get a buyer's agent now?
Well, it depends on. Okay, so let me use examples. It depends on how the listing agent handled that interaction with you. I work a certain way. If it is that, and this is me, so this is being recorded. This is so if I'm at an open house and I see this all the time, a buyer comes into my open house. They come without their agent. They sign in without their agent. They mention nothing about the agent, and they probably will then mention when they either have the offer in and then say, oh, by the way, I've been working with, an agent for, a period of time. They've been showing me around. And so we prefer, if you've been working with someone, and it goes back to loyalty. If you're working with someone and you go to an open house, it's good to mention that you're working with another agent, and so putting in the offer and then saying, oh, by the way, I'm working with your agent. We really would prefer that you come with your agent. Once I'm working with a buyer, we go out together. I rarely have my clients go to any open house without me because to avoid things like these.
Yeah. And that's a key point. It's as Krista said. Again, you just have to establish this cadence with your agent. And as Krista said, she doesn't mind if people go to open houses without her. But again, they should know that you're going to the open house. And it's a trust thing, right? You're saying, hey, I'm going. It doesn't look like we want it, but like we can swing by on Saturday. We'll be in the neighborhood at a birthday party. Great. But if they're in the know, the more you share, like any good relationship, the more open you are and the more you share, the better off everything will go and run more smoothly throughout the process. So finding these properties, finding these open houses, what is that cadence between buyer and home buyer? I'm sorry, between home buyer and agent. Who finds the properties? Do you have access to properties that aren't on StreetEasy? What else are other places can people go? Is it expected you find the properties, the home buyer? How does that usually work?
I usually tell my clients about 80% of the inventory is on StreetEasy. So yes, we might have some off market, or we might have some sellers that we know are going to be selling in the summer that we could be showing you, or people who are a little far out. Most of the inventory is there, so it really depends on how you want to run your search. I have some buyers who say, I have no time, I need you to send me the apartments. Actually, don't even send them to me. I have Sunday to go out, I want to see 5 apartments, let's go. I need to really know your search, so that's fine too. I have other clients that say, I get the alerts, I've set it up, I just want you to come to look at the first few apartments so I know you know what I'm looking for. We kind of want to pop in after work here and there, but please go, again, I established relationship. Please go see the property that I'm interested in. So there's plenty of times where I go back. They went to the open house. On Monday, I'm there measuring. I'm looking at the windows. I'm looking at the exposure. I'm speaking to the real estate agent, the listing agent, and establishing a relationship with the listing agent to build rapport and build favor in the event that my client now wants to move forward on this purchase. I want the listing agent on my side. I want the listing agent to want to sell my client the apartment. So there's much more that I think finding the right property for my client is only 10% of my job. The other 90% goes into securing the actual apartment, to doing the due diligence behind the apartment, to quarterbacking, like Carolyn said. So finding that property, you can find it, I can find it. Yeah.
Great. And so I think we'll move on to the next question, but the close of that is, again, I think at those first couple of dates, ask, or say, I love looking, or I don't have time to look. Set that expectation early, and of course it can change along the way. But bottom line is, it really is up to you and how you want to run your search, and that you find the agent who's happy to look for properties or realizes that you're always going to be one step ahead of them because you're looking at 3 a.m. and they're doing something else, which happens all the time as well. So people wanting to know, how long does it take to find my home? How often are you working? How long are you working with clients before offer is made?
It depends on you primarily. Again, if you're very specific and know exactly what you want, and that is something that is plentiful in the market, then we should be able to find something very quickly. I'd say on average, most buyers find something within the first 30 to 60 days of looking, but that's on average. I certainly have people that I've worked with longer, and a lot of that also has to do with whether what you're looking for is very hard to find in the market. It also depends on you. Are you the kind of person I have, I had a client who was looking for new development in Harlem and wanted enormous outdoor space. There was one. We saw it the first, that's not true. 2.5. I don't think the third one really qualified. And he knew which one he wanted, and that was it. And then there are people who don't know, I could do Manhattan, I could do Brooklyn, I could, if it has this, I can spend this much, but if it has that, then I'll stretch it for this, and of course that naturally takes a little bit longer. But it is certainly something, like we were talking about on that first date. Okay, well, this is what I'm looking for. All right, well, here's what your expectations should be if that's what you're looking for. And just really having that communication, I think, is going to help you figure out how long it takes. But in terms of actually finding the property, on average, 30 to 60 days. And then if you're condo or co-op with financing, then you're looking at least probably another couple months after that. And of course, always possibly longer, depending on the co-op board or condo board schedule, and that sort of thing.
Right. And then, so we're going to wrap up here in about 30 seconds, but have any of you done any cryptocurrency purchases? And I think my question, there are actually a couple questions about it, which I think is fascinating, and it's more of these lovely ladies are going to be in the lobby afterwards to answer your questions, so I was looking for those people who are interested in crypto and purchasing with Bitcoin. Is all of you, one of you, someone in particular who's done it?
Not yet.
Not
No
yet?
purchases through crypto, but if you are going to liquidate, please tell your banker that there's going to be a huge cash infusion on your cryptocurrency.
There we go. Okay. So great questions, and I think it is really interesting to see what happens with the cryptocurrencies. Maybe more interesting a couple months ago, now less, but it'll come back. So they will be. So Krista, Teresa, Carolyn, thank you so much. They will be in the lobby afterwards to answer any questions you have, any we didn't get to. Also, all their information is in your pamphlet. They'd love to hear from you. That's why they're here, is to help you navigate some of these tricky places. But cannot thank you enough for being here and your expertise. So thanks very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And then next up, we're going to bring our home buyers. So the perfect follow-up here. Welcome. So we've heard data, we've heard about mortgages, we've heard from agents, and these are recent first-time home buyers. So maybe they came to last year's seminar, but they recently have entered the world of home ownership. So I'm going to give you lots of great tips. So we'll start with just some intros. And how I usually like to do this is obviously your name, and then also scale of 1 to 10, how stressful you thought the home buying process was on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most stressful. So we'll start with that. Name, scale of 1 to 10. Nikki?
Hi, I'm Mickey. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10 is about 8. Before I came here, I asked my wife, and at first, maybe 6, but I think that's because we're successful and we're very happy where we are. But looking back, it was definitely an 8.
Hi, my name is Christiana, and I think it was a 4 for me.
Hello? It should be. Give it a try again. Hello? Is there a button on there? Oh.
Hello, I'm Allie, and I would say a 3, so I agree.
Hello, I'm Taina, and I would say a 6.
Okay, great. Next quick round robin question. is how long, so the big question is, how long have you been in your home? People want to know how long it took, but we're going to start with how long have you been in your home, like moved in?
We've been in our place 6 months.
I've been in my place for about a year.
7 months.
7 months.
Terrific. How long did it take you to find it?
It took us about 4 months.
3 months.
I would say 6 to 8. There was a false start. So 6 once we were really ready.
Yeah, about 4 to 5. Well, 4.5.
Perfect. And how many homes did you look at before this was it?
We looked at about 6.
6.
15.
15.
14.
14. I like to tell people that my husband and I looked at 85. So there's like a whole wide array there. And sometimes you know exactly what you want, so it's easy, or you're looking again, as Teresa already talked about, that little grid of 4x4. But you all found your homes pretty quickly, which is great. So Christiana, we're going to start with you. You were one of the lower scores on stress. You also have wanted to buy a home since you were literally 14 and have crafted your life around making that dream happen. But at the same time, you said you found a lot of surprises during the process. So tell us kind of what were some of those moments where you said, oh my God, I didn't anticipate that this would happen.
Yeah, so I've been preparing to buy a home since I was a teenager. I grew up with parents who had bought and flipped and rented out homes. So it was something I knew that I wanted to do, but I don't think that there's anything that can really prepare you for the process until you're in it. So as much as you can read about it, there's really no feeling like going into an open house and seeing other people there and going, oh my goodness, there are other people in the world who I'm actually up against, who might have more resources, or they might not be first-time home buyers. So there were surprises all along the way, I think.
Okay, yeah, great. And then, Mickey, you had a very interesting and different experience than others. As one of our agent panelists said, 99% of properties are represented by an agent. The other 1% are called FSBOs, for sale by owner, which means the owner has decided, I'm going to market and sell my property on my own. Mickey bought a FSBO. So tell us about that process, how you found it. Was it great? Was it terrible?
Yeah, it was actually interesting listening to.
And for the record, his was the highest stress. Just to point that out.
It was interesting listening to the buyer's agents, because I think if we worked with one of them, it could have been totally different. Because we did actually start with an agent, but it was just the experience wasn't that great. So then we just decided to sort of see if we can find something on our own. And we just kind of lucked out. We found something on StreetEasy, and it happened so quickly. We found something on a Saturday morning. We reached out to the owner, and we saw the place on that Monday morning. And they gave us a lot of information just because there was a lot of just free-flow conversations. Is there an owner or buyer? There's no one else involved. And then by that afternoon, we put an offer. And then that Thursday, it was accepted. And 2 weeks later, we were on contract. It happened so fast. And it was actually a little shocking how quickly it happened. But, yeah.
So just so everyone's clear, so Mickey and his wife bought a place from an owner who didn't have an agent, and they didn't have an agent. So actually an agent-free transaction, highest stress. And actually would love to hear more. You know, you had a bad start with an initial agent, and I think something interesting we've heard is this, I'm sorry, we're going to keep going with this dating analogy, but that, you know, maybe sometimes you have to keep looking for someone else, and that first time is not, you know, that first date or second date, this isn't working, and instead of sort of putting that blanket on the industry as a whole, or I don't need a buy-side agent, is actually an opportunity to go try and find someone who matches your needs better.
Yeah, the agent that we did talk to, it was interesting because they definitely encouraged us to sort of expand our neighborhoods. You know, we were looking in Jackson Heights initially, but also, you know, Woodside, Sunnyside, all those various areas, and the agent sort of was pushing us towards Forest Hills, which is actually a really nice neighborhood that we didn't really consider before. So that was definitely a really interesting experience to sort of force us to think outside the box. But, you know, as far as once we got into this, the whole contract, it was a little bananas because we had to rely heavily on our lawyers and then also our loan agent, which was super helpful because they answered every question we had. And then actually, since it was a co-op, the application packet took us basically several full days of just photocopying things. And it was funny, every time there was something that was frustrating, we're like, I guess this is probably what an agent would help us with. So it was a little scary because, co-ops can be very strict about what they receive. I've heard horror stories where they reject you just because something's missing from the packet. And when you're, photocopying these things and they're huge, enormous packets, and you're like, does each copy of this have everything? So it really creates a lot of stress, and then you submit it, and then you're just waiting, and you're like, oh my God, I totally forgot to put my bank statements or something.
It worked out, though.
Yes,
So.
it did.
Good. Allie, you talk about your false start. Tell us more about that.
So my husband and I had decided we're going to buy in New York. We can see ourselves here at least 5 years. I think if I waited to say I can be here forever, I'd never have bought. So at least 5 years, we know we'll be here. And started passively looking. We'd been saving for a while. But I'm very bad at being passive, and so found a place on StreetEasy that looked really cool, went to see it. As we're walking into it, called, probably did what you guys just talked about, called an agent that had been referred to me by a friend and said, hey, I talked to you, I sent you an email that we're starting to look, we're going in to actually look at this place. I think we're going to like it. We did like it. But we're like, I don't know if we're really in the place to do this, because there were other people at the show and we weren't certain that we were actually prepared. The place was still on the market a month later, and we're like, oh, nobody wants it. So we went back and with our agent, walked through, put in an offer, and a week later someone came in all cash. And so, I was barely getting to 20% down, so the fact that they had all cash was a whole nother deal, so I couldn't even be that sad that we didn't get it, because we weren't even competing. But looking back, now what I know, our agent, he's like, you don't really have quite the savings you need to have. You have like 2/3 of it, there's a third missing. That we probably need to get that in line before we're going to go down this process. So in the end, it was very good that someone else got this place, because I think we would have been in a place where we were slightly cash poor right after closing. We could have done it, but it would have been tight. And instead, we waited another 6 months, essentially, got our money in line, and bought later.
Great. Gianna, you used a Brooklyn Neighborhood Services group really as a backbone for your search and information. And I think a lot of folks don't know that there are community services out there that can help them. So tell us a little bit more about how you found out about them and what they did to help you during your process.
Yeah, so I'm part of Community Board 3 in Brooklyn, Bed-Stuy, and while I was on the board, there was a presentation by Brooklyn Neighborhood Services, and they were talking about home buyers seminars, home buyer counseling, and really navigating the home buyers process. And my husband and I, we were looking on websites at homes, but what got us into the home market was that our neighbors on our block were all selling their homes, and we wanted to see how they lived. So we went inside and said, what is going on here? What's happening? And then, but it was rapid. It was a lot of turnover on the block and changes happening. So we said, well, maybe we should go into home ownership as well. So we reached out to Brooklyn Neighborhood Services, and we went through the first-time home buyers course. And I can't stress enough that it's very, 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 very helpful to go through a first-time home buyers course, because a lot of the terms, like when we went across the street, we met with agents who said, are you pre-approved? We didn't know what that was, so we said, yeah, yeah, we are. We just wanted to see the rest of the house, so we just said whatever we need to say to let them see the house, and we signed whatever we said, and they said, do you have an agent? Yeah, we do, everything. But after going through the course, we finally knew what those terms meant, what it meant to have an agent, what it meant to be pre-approved, what it meant to qualify and be an eligible first-time home buyer. And one of the interesting things as well is that they stay with you through the entire process. So not only do you complete like the first-time homebuyer course, but as you put in an offer and you have questions like, I don't know, the agent said this to me, they'll give you advice to the best of their ability, and up to when you put in your offer, up until closing, and then they let you fly after that. But they stay with us the entire time.
Fantastic. And similar to Allie, you also had an experience where you needed to up your budget or pad your budget a little bit. When did you have that realization?
When I realized I wasn't going to afford $1 million property in Brooklyn. Yeah, so once we got the pre-approval from a bank, we had to really figure out, okay, well, we need, about $12,000 for our down payment, and we need about $18,000 on the back end for closing costs. Those are some things that we didn't know, and we talked to, not only did we realize that we wasn't going to afford $1 million, but that we also needed to start looking at renovation properties, and we started to look at distressed properties and looking at banks that would offer a 203K mortgage to us, because we knew from that point on, when we looked at a traditional bank, that we were going to go into a renovation project.
Great, and we will come back to renovations, I promise. But let's stick on budgets for a second. So most of you did not end up purchasing at the top of your budget, right? So you had your range, go here to here, here's like the mega stretch, here's the maybe we didn't buy enough, and you all were somewhere in the middle of that. Mickey, I'll let you sort of chat about the advantages and disadvantages, and in the end, did it feel where you landed up like a good place? And I think often people look actually out of their range, and often we tell people it's actually really good to look at things that are way out of your budget, because you often see that you still have to make compromises. It's not like the grass is that much greener if you have, unfortunately, another $500,000. Like it's not this dream home waiting for you, but would love to hear your thoughts on that.
We were actually towards the top of our budget, so we did have to make some compromises. For instance, our thought was, buy a place and maybe renovate the bathroom. So that's something that's gonna have to wait a little longer. But yeah, it was right there, and it's perfect.
Great.
Yeah. I'd also say that once you get kind of through the entire home buying process and you've paid your closing costs, and then you look at your bank account and you get that sinking feeling of, oh my God, I used to have so much more money. You also need to have money for afterwards, because as a homeowner, you're responsible for whatever repairs, things that come up. 1 month after I bought my place, my boiler broke, and that was just an unexpected, multi-$1,000 cost that I was luckily able to cover, but I just had all of these nightmare scenarios of my head, and if I had bought a place that was more expensive, would I be able to sustain myself for the first year of home ownership?
Yeah.
So we ended up purchasing definitely in the middle of our budget, which is good. There were places we looked at that were at the high end, and we knew that if we got it, we would have very little money left over, and you'll need that. Whether something goes wrong or not, you're moving into a new space, you're going to need furniture that you didn't need before, unless you don't mind looking at empty rooms. Not many, because it's New York, but one empty room. But you'll need that. There's always surprises. I would say closing costs, I agree. We wanted to have 15 to 20K on hand for those types of things. And are we going to talk about how to set that budget?
You can go.
Okay, so maybe everyone knows this, but we kind of were like, well, what can we afford? And so the way we set that, rather than looking at what you want, because you'll probably look and end up above where you can actually afford, my husband and I sat down and just looked at, okay, this is what we make, this is currently what we're paying in rent, and this is what we think we can start to save every month. And that amount of savings that we could afford was kind of like us testing ourselves for what would be our mortgage payment. So you start putting that away, and it kind of trains you to spend at a certain level, but also that money, extrapolated out can give you, okay, I'm in 600 to 800, or I'm in this range, because I know I can afford this kind of payment on a regular basis.
Yeah, we purchased at the middle as well, and similar to what Ali said, some of those costs that, well, we went to a renovation project that we needed, that we didn't know we needed, and some contingencies that were built into the mortgage, like replacement of windows and stucco on the side of the building. That's we were very happy that we didn't go towards the higher end of our budget because we wouldn't have had money to renovate those.
Great. So lots to think about. And something Tony had mentioned also, which thankfully hasn't come up in a negative in either of the panels, but these co-op and condos, they can, the roof, there's a leak, there's floods, something happens, and your monthly charges can go up like from 1 minute to the next, and everything was planned to the dollar for you of these are my common charges or my maintenance costs, and then all of a sudden, whoa, it's double, then that can actually really put you in a bind as well. And so there is often something to be said for leaving a little bit there for the imagination. And the key is not spending it after, right on the next thing. So your neighborhoods that you ended up buying in are up on the slide behind, but curious to hear, is that where your search started? So did you buy in the neighborhood, like when Teresa talked about her 4x4 grid, right? We all start with a little pocket. How many of you actually purchased in the neighborhood you thought you were going to live in?
We did, but if we looked first, and then we ended up looking a whole ton of other places, but we were very happy to end up back where we started.
Great.
Yeah, I would say Park Slope was at the top of my list. I looked everywhere towards the beginning of my search, but as I kind of narrowed in, I knew that I wanted to be somewhere close to that area.
Looked almost everywhere. In the end, your commute really helps dictate the neighborhoods that you'll consider. We considered Brooklyn for a hot second, and Queens. Even looked at the South Bronx, but we'd been living in East Harlem for 5 years, liked it, wanted to live in Harlem, of course, because it's very cool, but didn't actually like what we could afford there, so we just kept moving up, and loved Washington Heights when we ended up seeing it. So we're mostly eventually focused in on Washington Heights and Inwood, knowing North Manhattan could work for us.
So, my husband and I, we have 2 daughters, and we wanted to live close to Highland Park, which is not quite Bushwick, but is also by Cypress Hills, and the park also meets Glendale in Queens. So we were looking 4x4 in that area, but we continuously was getting priced out or outbid, one of the two, with multiple offerings when we put in our offer. But it wasn't until we actually found East Flatbush by chance. It wasn't until there was a HUD, and if any of you are familiar with HUD homes, you place a bid on a property, and the next day they tell you whether or not your bid was accepted. So the first time we did that was in Queens, in Richmond Hill, and wasn't accepted. It was a 2-family. And then the second time we did that, it was in East Flatbush. And we said, oh, wow, look at this neighborhood over here. So we started honing in on that neighborhood, and then that's where we ended up buying.
Great. So doesn't sound like too many compromises, right? Neighborhood-wise, everyone ended up in a good spot. Other compromises that you might have made along the way? We'll start with you, Mickey.
The big compromise for us involved a flip tax for the co-op. A lot of co-ops have flip tax, but ours is significantly higher than normal.
And will you explain for folks in case they don't know what it is?
So basically, a flip tax is a certain percentage of your sale price goes back to the co-op. It could be 2%, 5%, but ours is significantly higher. And basically, the pros and cons of, well, if we want to sell this in 5 years, it's 25% that's going to go back to them. But we sort of had a long conversation, like, well, we're actually looking at this as a long-term thing, 10 years, maybe more. So we're like, well, this is not only an investment, but it's a home, and we don't, in 10 years, 15 years, we don't think it's going to be, something that would be worth sacrificing the opportunity to live there.
And do you think that gave you negotiating power? Like, was the co-op you bought priced less than comparables in the neighborhood because of the flip tax?
Actually, the comps were exactly the same,
Okay.
but you know, we felt that it was almost undervalued just because of the size and the location and sort of what the area and the building offers.
Great. Christiana?
So I think going into the home buying process in New York, you kind of know that you're going to be, or you're probably going to be, a pretty small fish in a really big pond. So knowing ahead of time what are your must-haves, nice-to-haves, and then like things you can compromise on early, that's really helpful. So the things that I compromised on were being a little bit farther out than I wanted to be, but I made myself like this big long list of like a mathematical model like that I put together that was like, well, this means more to me than that, and so if you kind of like add up this aggregate score, like it kind of like works out that it's okay. So I think I hit enough of the must-haves, nice-to-haves to make up for the slightly longer commute.
Well, where we were in East Harlem, we had outdoor space. We were in a tiny, not that great apartment, but probably equal space outside. So it would have been amazing to be able to keep that, but we essentially would have had to give up probably 300 square feet in what we ended up having if we were really going to require outdoor space, just because it's so hard to come by. So in the end, that's what we gave up, was that space. But I think I thought we would miss it a lot more than we do. And now actually our apartment itself is much nicer than what our old place was, so we needed the outdoor space to escape from it. So now it's actually like, no, I like being inside now. And there's parks outside too, so you know, we can get there a different way.
Yeah, we compromise. When we started our search, we started looking at a lot of condos and co-ops, and we realized that we possibly needed more space. Like, we didn't want to share one bathroom anymore. So when we worked with our realtor, Raul, we kind of said, no, we want we want 2 bathrooms. Like, no matter where it is, it could be in Queens, it could be in Brooklyn, we just need at least 2 bathrooms. But that meant that we no longer are going to look at the co-ops and the condos by Highland Park, that now we're going to have to start looking at maybe 1 family and or 2 family homes in order to accommodate what we wanted.
Great. So always trade-offs, right, in any big purchase like this. And again, I always think it's really important. It is good to look well above your budget because there are still trade-offs. There is no silver bullet when you add, you know, if you stretch yourself, if you add a couple hundred to your budget, usually you're still gonna, you know, give up something or get something else, and you'll have that need to have, must have, which is a great way of organizing those thoughts. So we'll keep you both on the hot seat there at the end. You both did renovations. So something that, and that was a question that came up on the agent panel, is it a plus, is it a minus, something you were planning to do, knew you wanted to do, or something that just became a necessity based on the place that you bought?
Yeah, it became a necessity. It became a necessity given our price point. To your point, we did look at things that were way off our price point. We wanted to see what was out there, and that helped guide us into what we can put in something that we needed to fix up. We did not budget as much as we thought that, pretty much we went over. But what was great about Brooklyn Neighborhood Services and any other first-time home counseling agency is that they have grants. So we weren't eligible for the city grants or the state grant, but this individual organization had a grant, which is acquisition and renovation grant, which helps out tremendously because it was $27,000 towards your home. So we factored that much. We put aside we put like $2,000 down on our, because you have to put money down on the down payment, and the rest of the money goes to renovation. You have the flexibility to choose how you want to split that up. So we split it up with the $2,000 towards the down payment, and then everything else on the property. And they also provided the contractor. Working with the contractor, it was. We didn't anticipate. We didn't anticipate a lot of things. We had to do the entire electrical over. And when you're a renter, you know, boiler, radiator, electrical, like someone else does that. So when they're like, no, you have to do it, not only are you have to be hip to being a first-time home buyer, you have to be hip to being a home owner. You have to know what you're going to have to renovate in the future, what you're gonna start with. So we initially started with the first floor and the basement, and some of the things that we're going to have to do later on, like the roof and maybe the boiler, things like that. So it's lovingly a project. Our home is now our project that, just built us together. And we're like, what are we gonna work on this year? What are we gonna work on next year? So the renovation process started that off, but it definitely, we thought it was like, oh, well, you put money aside in renovation and you're done. And it's like, no, you're not done. It's always gonna be a project, loving project, but I'm very happy with the way that it's shaping out.
Right?
When we went and saw the place that we ended up buying, I loved it because I love so many things about it, like the floors, the light, all those types of things that you notice after you've seen so many apartments. But it was old, it was a co-op, it was pre-war, it had all these different rooms. And so I knew immediately what I want to do is take out half these walls so we have this free flow of space to hang out in. We don't need 2 bedrooms. Can we open up that wall and make it more living space? But that's hard to do right after you put in a down payment on a house. And so when we were in the negotiating process, we pushed our agent to say, hey, if we come in under, can we negotiate? It was a sponsor sale. So you probably can't do this with a random person selling their apartment that they want to get out of. But on a sponsor sale, I think sometimes you have more flexibility. And so we said, hey, we're coming in under, you want this. If we meet you halfway, will you take out some of these walls? And we're happy to delay a month moving in. And we essentially made a punch list of what needed to be done in order for us to close, which was removing 3 walls. And for them, that was a manageable amount of work, not moving electrical, not moving plumbing, but it made the space exorbitantly different from where it started, made us so much happier, and it was work we would have done. And the biggest thing is, it's money that got rolled into our mortgage that we're now paying off, rather than, I don't know, the $20,000 we would have had to pay up front if we were to do the renovation after. So for us, that was great, because we didn't have to pay it all up front, so we kind of got to put it away, and now we're paying it off.
Fantastic. And that's, every situation is different, and back to, Allie, your story particularly is interesting in that false start, right, where an apartment that probably for a bunch of reasons was not right, and then here you've ended up in a place where you've really been able to make the system work for you and end up with something even better and more money still in the bank, which is great. So we're going to move to questions shortly, so make sure you're putting them into Slido. But before, we're going to do a back to 1 to 10. How happy are you that you bought? 10 being the happiest. And then a bit of advice that you would bestow, something you wish that you knew as a first-time home buyer that you can bestow onto our audience of soon-be home buyers. So Mickey, go ahead.
Definitely 10. We're super happy with where we live. And I think the number one thing I would recommend is having your finances in order. In particular, if you're fortunate to have a family that might want to bestow a gift of money, have that sorted out sooner than later. Even if you don't have a place, it is the banks they want a money trail for everything, which can involve getting letters from people, and it's a hassle that is best resolved sooner than later.
Also 10, I've always rented in New York before, and there's such a sense of grounding when you have your own place. I mean, it also comes with like a niggling anxiety that you have to be responsible for this place, but it's great to feel like you really have a place that's your own. I would definitely echo the finances point. That's really, really critical that you have your finances in order, but also being aware of everything that you need to be responsible for after you close, which includes the closing costs, but then also as some people here have mentioned, repairs that you might have to do, renovations. There's it doesn't end once you close.
Yeah, it was a great nugget of after you home buy, you home own, which is a significant responsibility.
I agree 10 until something goes wrong, and then it'll probably be a 5, and then it'll go back to a 10. So far nothing's gone wrong, knock on wood. But my advice is there's 2 major investments you make in your life. One is your 401k, and you if you're like me, you're pretty passive about it. It's sitting there and you're hoping it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. But the second one is buying a home. And so don't be passive about it, because it's the thing you have the option to be very active about. Do your research. I looked at StreetEasy. I did a lot of reading on Brick Underground. They have some fantastic breakdowns of what's a co-op, what's a condo. Because I started from 0, much like everyone does. And so I would just say that. And even though you have your agent, and of course they're a great resource, you need to be looking out for you, because they definitely want you to get the house you want, but they also want to close the sale, so you have to fight for what you want. And my agent probably wasn't super excited that I decided we want to add renovations to this and we want to do all these things because it prolongs the process, but we fought for that. We wouldn't have gotten that if we just said, sure, we'll just pay less and go with it. We'd be doing those renovations 6 months down the line on our own. So know what you want and ask for it, because the worst they can say is no.
I'm laughing because you brought up the analogy about the dating. I had 3 dates. So I had 3 realtors, 2 at the same time. So I was testing the waters. But yeah, that brings up a good point. For my husband and I believe it's a 10. We really enjoy our home. We really enjoy the process. The renovation, as stressful as it was, I'm surprised I didn't go to 8-2 with the stressful level. But we're really comfortable with where we are right now, where we landed. The advice that I want to give is you can plan for the down payment, you can plan for the closing costs, but be aware that there are some hidden fees that we weren't made aware of. We had to pay for appraisals, we had to pay for inspection, home inspection, title, and because we were going into a renovation, we actually had to put about $10,000 in escrow to secure the property. And it's like, who has that lying around? So when you brought up the gifts, we had to get that letter from our family members who, we owe a lot to secure the property. But that was something that just threw us an entirely different direction. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's great to have a support system. If it's not your agent, but someone who's going to navigate the process. For us, again, it was Brooklyn Neighborhood Services. Our realtor, one of the realtors, right, and was dating. But no, the final one that we closed with, Raw from Citizen International. He was there with us as well, and he was understanding no, they really want this property. We really need this property, and on hands was on deck. Even our lender. And your lawyer. Your lawyer is key. I know you mentioned it earlier, but your lawyer is pretty much key, because after your realtor hands you off, your lawyer is really that number one person who's doing the work, who's adding those, no, we want you to pay that first bill water tax, not the buyer paying that first bill. The first bill, or we want you to pay the taxes, not the buyer. So having those conversations at the back end really can help you secure that property.
Great. Thank you. A lot of people interested in how you time the end of your rental lease to then moving into your new apartment. So Mickey, we'll start with you.
We actually really lucked out. Our lease ended the same time that our mortgage started, but that really just was happenstance. It could have gone a lot of different ways. I think it's the kind of thing you just have to hope it lines up. At least that's how it did for us. We were just very lucky that everything closed literally 2 weeks before our lease was up.
Mine did not line up at all. So I bounced back and forth between Airbnbs for a little over a month. I mean, I was buying on my own, and so I didn't have to worry about moving a ton of furniture or another person, but I lived out of a suitcase. It was a cool experience though, and I got to see a lot of different neighborhoods. I specifically got Airbnbs in the neighborhoods I wanted to look in, just to make it easier to like know what it would be like to live in those neighborhoods and see what the commutes were like. But it was kind of tricky.
Well, we'd been living in East Harlem in the same building for 5 years, so we had a really good relationship with our landlord, and maybe this isn't the case for all, but again, I always ask, so why don't you ask for what you want? So we told them, we said, hey, Shai, like, we're going to be looking at places to live, to stay forever, 5 years, as much as I can commit to. And in return, if you'll let us kind of do this kind of, almost like a month-to-month agreement, which is not common in New York, we'll give you an extra heads up. Like, we'll give you 2 months, or we'll give you 3 months, because this is a long process usually. We'll let you know when we think we've found it. We'll keep you informed as we're going through the process. And he was happy to do that for us. Because we had that relationship, we'd been living there for 5 years, he trusted us. We were apparently not annoying tenants. And we did give him 2 months for us moving out.
Yeah, we didn't have much difficulties. We also were month to month, but we've been with the same landlord for about 6 years. So that wasn't anything to worry about. And what was one of the cool things is while we were transitioning out, we were able to stay while the renovations was happening. Because legally you can't go into a home that doesn't have plumbing or electrical. In New York City, you have a right to shelter. So we worked out a lot of those things while we're waiting for the house to be built or completed.
Great. So all pretty, but in general, sounds, I think Allie's totally right with all of these things is just ask for, the worst is your landlord says no, or just ask for what you need and hopefully you can get it. So moving on to down payments, a couple questions here about that. So one of the questions is if people are willing to answer what percentage you put down, and then also some questions about if any of you use down payment assistant programs. So, Tiana.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier, but in terms of percentage, it's 3.5% that we put down, and the rest, the $2,000 came from the grant, and that was suitable enough for our home. But other than that, we weren't eligible for some of the city and state down payment assistance programs.
So we put 20% down on our apartment, and that false start where we needed more money to really get to the next stage, we essentially knew we could either have that money in a year with more savings, or we could see if we could get a loan from one of our parents. Not my parents, but my husband's parents. And so, and what we looked at was the market, and we're like, in New York City, if we just save for another year, the market's going to increase that much in another year, and we're going to be pushed further and further out, was our thinking, just because of the way real estate changes. And so we ended up getting a loan from one of our parents, and I would just look into the details if you guys consider this. There's amounts that can be given to you without tax, and there's amounts that if you go over that, you're going to start being taxed in your income. And so just know those differences, and then we're paying back that money now to his parents over the next essentially 5 to 7 years.
I put 21% down because there's a threshold for the size of mortgage that you get. If I had put 20% down, I would have met the threshold for a jumbo mortgage, which is over $500,000. So I wanted to, and then the interest rates go up and there's more fees. So I got right under that.
Yeah, we put down 20%, which is why I was sort of putting the emphasis on that, making sure your finances are in order, and if you have to borrow money, because like I said, it's just a big hassle otherwise.
Yeah, great. It keeps, and obviously I've spoken to all of you before this, but so well prepared, all of you, and well versed. I mean, just for all of you out there, like you really know your stuff. Fantastic. And then you're all 10s, so it worked out. It worked out really nicely. inspection. So did any of you have your places inspected, and where did you find your inspector? We'll start front.
We didn't, actually.
Yeah. We didn't either, don't feel bad.
I inspected it, so like I walked around and like I was like, it looks great. But I mean, well, first my place is not that big, so I was just like, fingers crossed, I hope nothing breaks. And then the first month, my boiler broke. But you know, just be prepared. Just know that that's going to happen if you don't have an inspector.
We did not. And my impression had been that you use an inspector when you're buying a freestanding home. And we were buying an apartment in, of course, a larger building, so we thought we were probably okay doing that.
Yes. We used him twice, John Esposito. The first home that we looked at, we thought everything was great. And then we realized after the inspection that the building was collapsing on its side. And upon his recommendation that we would have to purchase a hydroponic, I don't know, something to pin the house up as it was falling on the neighbor's house. So we were so thankful that we had that one. And that was when we had an offer accepted and everything, and we had a home inspection, and that happened. And this home, we wanted to make sure it was sound, given that the first floor didn't really have any walls. And he was like, no, this is fine. I could actually do this myself if I had to renovate it. So yes, I would encourage, if you are buying a freestanding home, just please get a home inspector.
Yeah. And then, you know, when you buy a condo or a co-op, part of the due diligence should be that that condo or co-op has minutes from their board meetings. And those minutes are meant to highlight issues that you should, like, oh, the roof got inspected, right, is a red flag to your lawyer that they need to ask a question, or there's an assessment coming. But those minutes are critical, which is also why your lawyer is critical, because your lawyer will review all of those minutes. And some smaller buildings aren't great about their minutes, but that's a piece of information that sometimes is more powerful than an inspection. In some of these bigger buildings where you can't really inspect the roof of a giant, you know, condo or co-op, they probably won't even let you up there. And then there's no way to really assess that. So this is also a place where you need that team of experts to help you navigate, is this a place where I need an inspection, do I not, type of thing. But a freestanding home, for sure, is a place. Were you going to add something, or?
Yeah, so my lawyer had also, I put in a bid on a place that was at the very top of my budget. My lawyer looked through the minutes and had found that there was 2 outstanding lawsuits from the building, like the homeowners against the building developer for building defects. So that saved my life. So absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there. And again, that's why the lawyer is really, really critical.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add, so we purchased our home through a bank, so it was as is. So we was kind of like, oh yeah, we need to make sure that this one is getting inspected.
Back to the home search. Who found your home, and what was your communication like with the agent? So, you know, people still asking that, who found it, you or them or you, where? So we'll go quickly. We'll keep going down the line.
My wife did on a Saturday morning.
Nice. And where?
StreetEasy.
Okay. Great. You can all go home.
I found my home also on StreetEasy, and I went I was the first person at the first open house. I went with my agent, and I made an offer on the spot.
We found it via StreetEasy, and I would also say it's very common to look at open houses without your agent, so don't be alarmed. Like, we probably went to 80% of our open houses without them, because it would just slow you down to align schedules. They can always go later, because they have more free time during the day when you're at work.
We found it, but we subscribed to multiple websites, and yeah.
Great. And then what else? So question here from a few folks. Is it common practice that your agent refers your legal representation? No, and they should not. and Teresa and Krista will give me the head nod on that, but that's something you should find separately. There's a bit of a conflict there, so you should find them separately, but your agent can help you find a lender. Like they can make recommendations of folks that they work with from a mortgage perspective. So I don't know from your experience, how you found your individual team members, we can maybe end on that as we're wrapping up here, but where you found your agent, where you found your lawyer, where you found your lender.
Just make sure everyone is separate. Please make sure everyone is separate. Your lawyer shouldn't know your realtor, shouldn't know your lender, vice versa, the lender shouldn't know. Just make sure everyone is separate. I found my lawyer through my job. I found the realtor, Brooklyn Neighborhood Services referred the realtor. And the lender, we made sure, we were looking for a 203K, so we were looking for any lender, and I think New York State has like a directory, I don't remember where I looked, but any lender that offered a 203K, and we looked at 3 banks, M&T, another one, but Quantic, and we ended up closing with Vanguard that no longer does mortgages, and they're not even a bank, they were a lending company. So I just wanted to make sure, and also the course said make sure that everyone is separate, because I did find while searching throughout our 15 or 14 homes that it can get muddled really quickly when you're searching.
And I found my agent, it was a referral from someone I worked with. It was probably 80% of what we needed, but it was good enough. Found our lawyer through our landlord. We asked, because this guy owned multiple buildings, so we asked him, who have you been using? He's clearly good. And so used him, and then used Wells Fargo for our mortgage. And they actually were the ones that were most aggressive in a good way about making the process move. Like at one point was yelling at the other people, asking them why they didn't have their stuff together. So, I mean, we actually really appreciated that. So yeah, but all very separate.
I got all of my different team members through referrals, also through either friends or coworkers. I would say if you're working with someone that you don't jive with or that you don't feel like is giving you good service or the respect that you deserve, go find someone else. I worked with a mortgage broker who was a complete jackass, and I really wish that I had been more aggressive about finding someone else.
Our lawyer we found through a friend. The lawyer had worked with a few of our friends, and it was a great fit. And then we just went to our bank where our accounts were already, and actually that worked out really well because everything is now just still in one place.
Excellent. Well, cannot thank you all enough for giving up your Saturday, and you've already bought your home, so thank you. And similar to the agents, these fine folks will also be in the lobby if you want to bombard them. And hopefully you've learned enough about them where if there's a particular question, you know who to aim it at. Good luck. So they'll be in the lobby. And thank you all very, very much. There'll be all of this on the StreetEasy blog after, and you'll also get an email survey so you can tell us how we can improve this for next time. But thank you.